Welcome to Mind in the Making, a chat with author Ellen Galinsky. We're really glad that you're here, and we want you to chat with us via the chat feature in the platform. So if you look for the brown widget down on the bottom, it has 3 little people on it. You can click on that, and you'll be able to chat with each other during the presentation and with our Bright Horizons mom bloggers. So join the conversation now, and let's start with this fill-in-the-blank question. When my child grows up, I want them to, what do you think? What do you want them to be able to do? And as you're thinking about that chat question, know that there's also a great conversation going on over on Twitter. So join us there, and the hashtag is BHWebinar. So I'm so excited that Ellen Galinsky is joining us today. Ellen, tell us a little bit about yourself.
My first job was as a teacher, a classroom teacher. I taught preschool children. I then was a coordinator of a child care program at Bank Street College where I worked. Ultimately, I was elected president of the National Association for the Education of Young Children, which is the largest professional group of early childhood educators, and did research on quality improvement in child care, but also do research on the workforce and workplace. We take a life cycle perspective. I am the co-founder and president of the Families and Work Institute, and like to think that one of the things that I've done is to be ahead of the curve, but to share the voices of parents, the voices of children. I wrote a book called The 6 Stages of Parenthood that looks at how we grow and change, not just how kids grow and change. I wrote a study called Ask the Children, the very first study that asked kids how they really, really feel about their employed fathers and mothers, always surprising findings. And my latest book is Mind in the Making, which is what we're going to be talking about tonight. I've worked on all aspects of children's development, and as you'll see for Mind in the Making, filmed close to 100 researchers and interviewed them and read thousands of studies. Most important to me, very most important to me, I'm the parent of 2 incredible grown-up children, and I have 2 grandchildren, a big gap in ages. I have a 19-year-old in college, and I have a 10-week-old.
That is a good gap. Thank you so much for telling us about yourself. And I'm Ruth Fedino. I work for Bright Horizons, and I'm a grandma too, and the mom of 3 successful adult children. And having read Mind in the Making, I think my kids have these skills. So I'm very glad about that. I'm just looking over the chats, Ellen, about what people wanted for their kids when they grow up, and self-sufficiency, respect, healthy, happy, mindful citizens of their communities, all good things, all things that these life skills can bring. So let's dive right in. What got you started on this topic of Mind in the Making, Ellen?
Well, I'm so glad to hear that people have this kind of aspiration for their children. If you think about what we measure as a society, we measure a very narrow spectrum of kids' development. We look at, scores on math and literacy, the content of what we know, but we don't look at the kind of people that we are, the kind of people we could become. So I think the parents on this webinar have it exactly right, and we've got some work to do as a society. I started Mind in the Making. I was going to do a study of children and learning, and I found when I interviewed children around the country as a prelude to developing a nationally representative study that too many kids had dropped out of learning. It wasn't just the high school graduation rate, but they had dropped out of learning. They weren't excited about it. And you think about kids, the ages of children who go to Bright Horizons or programs like that, and you can't stop them from learning. My little 10-week-old is just an inveterate and a learner who wants to see, to taste, to touch, to experience everything. And then from my workplace research, I heard from employers that that they're not too happy with the new entrants to the workplace. Well, you could say employers, have always said that about kids. The kids today, that's been going on forever. But they had some real complaints that, for example, they thought that too many young people had a fill-in-the-bubble mentality. They thought that answers to questions there were either A, B, C, or D, and yet if you look at the real challenges that we have as a people, as an economy, they aren't simple fill-in-the-bubble questions. They thought too few of us learn to work in teams, and yet we're not going to find a cure for AIDS as a single hero anymore. It's going to be a team sport. So there were real gaps in our education in fulfilling the kinds of values and goals that parents have for their children, and too many children dropping out of learning that made me ask the single question that has guided my journey now of 13 years, which is, how do we keep that fire, that passion for learning, alive in children? What can we do to fan it if it dims? And how do we foster children to be the kind of children who will thrive now and thrive in the future?
Yeah, what an interesting phrase, that dropping out of learning. It's so different. I mean, you can graduate from high school but still have dropped out of learning along the way.
And, you can see it in kids' eyes.
Yep.
The eyes, supposedly the window to the soul. But when I was doing focus groups of young people, and this is confirmed by studies of school engagement, I could see that their eyes were flat, not bright and sparkly the way young children's were.
Yeah, it is great to watch young children learning. Let's talk a little bit about executive function. That's a big part of your book. Tell us what executive function is.
Well, we could decide that we like that term or not like that term. One of my board members said it sounds like a guy in a pinstripe suit bossing you around in your brain. She said, could you change that term? But it is a term that scientists use. I think we're going to increasingly hear about this as our society ages, because there are lots of studies that show that we're going to age better if we keep our executive function skills working. They include things like being able to pay attention amid distraction, being able to remember the things that you have to do, being flexible because the world changes, so must we, and then not going on automatic, but doing what we need to do to achieve a goal. Basically, executive functions are all about having goals and sticking to them. And if you think about any of us and what we've accomplished in life, from raising our kids, for me, writing this book was a big accomplishment. I needed to be able to not go on automatic, but do what I needed to do to keep writing that book. Adele Diamond, who's a major researcher in executive functions, says that executive function skills are as important, if not more important, than IQ. And studies after study after study shows that they predict long-term success, short-term, long-term success for children. Adele Diamond says it's because executive function skills enable you to use the knowledge that you have, not just memorize things. So executive function skills are thinking, planning, analyzing, problem solving, and they are, I think, even though we may not like the term, it's going to be a term that we're going to hear more and more often.
So do all children have the capability to develop executive function? We've gotten several questions from parents of children with ADHD who have expressed a concern about that. Yes,
all these skills emerge in children. They emerge in every child. They may emerge in a different time frame, but they emerge in children, and then we have to promote them. And what was interesting to me, because, again, as I told you, I read more than 1,000 studies and interviewed and filmed so many researchers, what I could see is if these skills were promoted, and it was often unintentional, that we just happened to play games that promoted them, or said things to our kids that promoted them, or responded in ways that promoted them, then children were more likely to thrive. One of the researchers who's preeminent in child development, Jack Schoenkoff, pediatrician, who's at Harvard leading the Center for the Developing Child, says that they are the most important skills to promote. They're the how of learning. Content is the what of learning. Executive function skills are the how of learning. And he compares executive function skills to the air traffic controller of the brain. It pulls together our social, our emotional, and our cognitive capacities in pursuit of goals. So a child with ADHD can absolutely develop them, and parents whose kids have ADD or ADHD will know that doctors will often suggest things. They may not call it these names, but they'll suggest things to help children learn these skills.
That's great. In your book, Ellen, you identified 7 life skills that help children during childhood and into adulthood. So let's take a little while to go over those skills, and then we'll take a couple of them and talk about how families can help develop those skills. That'll be our plan. So here are the skills. Are they in order? Is there a developmental order, like a child rolls and sits and crawls and walks and runs?
The answer to that is mostly no, but there's a little bit of yes in it. That is, I think that focus and self-control underlie a lot of the other skills, and I wrote the book in this specific order because if focus and self-control is being able to pay attention amid distraction, you can't develop the skill of perspective taking, which is thinking about how someone else thinks and feels, unless you're able to have the self-control to differentiate what you think and feel and what someone else thinks and feel. So they build on each other, but they all develop at the same time, basically. Some of them emerge earlier, some of them emerge later. We'll talk more about that as we go through the skills, but but they all build on each other. And leading, I ended with self-directed engaged learning because that's essentially the goal of Mind in the Making, is to have us all live to learn and learn for life. So it's in the world we're going to need to be ongoing learners if knowledge is changing as fast as we all know it is. So that was my last skill, very much on purpose.
All right, so let's go through the skills. Tell us about focus and self-control.
If any of you have read Steve Jobs' book, and in the book, he is asked again and again and again what led to his success, and he says it was the ability to focus, to really figure out what his goals were and pursue those. Focus means that you pay attention. Again, it involves executive function, so you're remembering what it is you need to remember. You're thinking flexibly, and you aren't going on automatic. You're exercising self-control. Kids need this skill to achieve their goals. In games that develop this skill, you'll see the kind of things that we measure as a society, like literacy and math, shoot straight up because this underlies the kinds of learning of content that we do in life and in school.
So we're going to take a look at a short video about self-control in just a moment here. And as you watch the video, put in the chat box what do you think your child would do. So let's go ahead and take a look at this video.
Can I say something just about
Sure.
the video for 1 second before we start it, which is you've seen the cover of the book in the webinar, and it has marshmallows on it, and that's very much intentional as well. This study is not, there are hundreds and hundreds of studies that show similar kinds of results, but I used it on the cover to illustrate the fact that what happens to kids when they're little can predict, doesn't have to be automatic, but can predict what happens to them later. Again, these are life skills. These are executive function skills or life skills.
All right, let's take a look at the video then.
This is a bell, okay?
It's called the marshmallow test.
One goes.
We try to set up situations in which young children make a choice between 2 of something that you prefer later or 1 of something that you prefer a little less now.
If you had to choose, would you like to have 1 marshmallow?
Yes.
Or would you like to have 2 marshmallows?
The whole point of the experiment is to set up an intense conflict between the two.
Now here's how we play this game. I'm gonna leave the room. While I'm gone, if you can stay here and wait for me to come back without eating the marshmallows, then you get 2 marshmallows.
Okay.
But if you don't want to wait, you can make me come back right away.
The bell.
By pressing the bell. But then you get 1 marshmallow, not 2 marshmallows.
I won't ring the bell.
You won't ring the bell? Okay.
The conflict for the child is very heavy, is that about half will go one way and half will go the other.
Oh, you made me come back.
It's like a little window into willpower. 4 dilemmas that everybody faces.
I wonder what's taking her so long.
What we found is a very simple and direct way of measuring a competence that seems to make an important life difference. The longer they were able to wait at age 4, the better the ratings of their ability to control themselves and to pursue their academic and other goals.
Please come back.
The kids who are able to delay gratification are increasingly learning ways of managing frustration, ways of managing distress. In middle life, there's less drug use, higher educational level attainment, much less likely to have lowered self-esteem, to engage in bullying behavior with other people. The correlations are clearly statistically significant, but that in no way means that a youngster who at age 4 didn't wait a long time is in any way doomed.
All right, that's a great video. I know from the chat that some of you were having a hard time watching it. We are going to show another video again in a little while, so it seems like refreshing your browser works. But if you continue to have trouble, put something in the Q&A chat. But what a fascinating video! It was amazing how hard some of the kids had to work to get the end result they wanted. Really, a lot of work.
Now,
to get that going.
Sometimes people think that you have to be able to resist marshmallows or, you won't have good SAT scores or good relationships or, more life success. And what Walter Mischel is doing now, which I think is really important, is that he is looking at how the kids, their own strategies for managing, for having self-control, for delaying gratification, and he's teaching those to other children. Lots of studies have found that we don't teach focus and self-control by having kids be deprived of marshmallows or sitting in a chair. We tend to think of sit still, be quiet. But actually, it's games like Simon Says or Simon Says Do the Opposite that teach it, very active games. So if you think that your child is having trouble with this skill, important to do very active sort of games like red light, green light, Simon Says, moving fast to fast music and slow to slow music, and then switching and having them move slowly to fast music and quickly to slow music. That's how you promote that skill.
So let's talk a little bit about perspective taking then. That's the next slide that's there. Define that for us.
Well, I'm going to start again with an adult example. Peter Drucker, who's considered the father of modern management, says that the businesses that have been most successful in the world have had an outside-in perspective. That is, they've understood what their customers needed and wanted. And that's essentially what perspective taking is. It means that we can understand other people's likes, their dislikes, their intentions, their thoughts, their feelings. It's not just empathy. Empathy is a component of it, but it really is understanding the landscape of someone else's mind. And it's very important in school readiness. If you can understand what your teacher expects, kids are going to do better in school. It is very important in understanding literacy. If you can figure out what's going on with different characters, you've got a real edge up. And conflict. Larry Aber of New York University and his colleagues have found that kids who understand what other people may be trying to say with their behavior or with their words are much less likely to get into conflict. So they actually used a curriculum that uses children's books as a way of helping children think about others' perspectives in an experiment, and found that conflict in that school was greatly reduced. So it's not just teaching kids problem solving that'll stop conflict. You can play the game, what were they thinking? That's a good way to promote perspective taking.
All right, and communicating is the next skill that you list. Talk about that.
Well, we tend to think of communicating as literacy, but it's much more. It can be communicating in all different art forms or dance or that sort of thing. But at its core, communicating is figuring out what it is we want to say and then understanding how our communications will be understood by others. Again, in adult life, we call it the elevator speech. Imagine that you've got a minute or two to make a pitch for something that you really want, whether it's with the principal of your school and you need something for your child, or whether it's something at work or in your home life. It's the skill that teachers and employers feel is most lacking. So helping children think about what they want to say and then getting feedback about how their communications are heard by others is one of hundreds of ways that we can develop this skill. In the book, and I know we're going to have a drawing for the book, we tend to list 20, 30, 40 ways that families can promote these skills. So it shares the research, but it also shares lots of practical tips.
Great. And the next one is making connections. Tell us about making connections.
Well, that's the core of all knowledge. It's the symbolic representation. It's the stand for relationship. If you think about math, those numbers, that 4 or that 3 or that 1, stand for a number of objects. If you think about literacy, the word stands for an object, the object, and then the letters stand for what the word is, and you can sort of take it on and on into infinity. Symbolic connections, symbolic representations are at the core of learning. It's understanding what goes with something, what a concept is, that a cat is a cat and is different from a dog. Making unusual connections, which is a skill that I hear called for by philosophers of education all the time, is making unusual connections is the core of creativity. So it's asking kids, how do these things go together in one way, but then how do they go together in a different way? And by just that very simple way of talking, you're helping kids make unusual connections and helping them promote creativity. With all of these skills, any child can do them, any adult can teach them. It doesn't take expensive toys and equipment. It's using what you have, but in slightly different ways, like Simon says, do the opposite when I talked about focus and self-control. And most importantly, it's never too late.
Great. And the next life skill is critical thinking.
Mm-hmm. Critical thinking is the ongoing search for valid and reliable knowledge. And that's important because we use what we know, what we believe, what we think to guide our behavior. We make decisions on that basis. We only have to think of the news, and if you switch from channel to channel, you can hear very different versions of the same events of the day. And we have to, or if you think about all the advertising that's on TV, we have to figure out what's valid, what's real. We have to understand not only the events of our personal life or what our kid is trying to say to us or our boss. We have to be critical thinkers, and that's important because children they tend to believe people that they like or people who are like them. They don't always automatically search for the valid answer, and that's something that we promote by not answering their questions too quickly. If we answer their questions too quickly, then they'll move on. But if you say, well, how do you think you'd find out the answer to that question if it's possible to do that? And involve them in an experiment. That's helping them think like scientists. That's promoting critical thinking.
Great, great. And taking on challenges, what's that all about?
Well, we live in a stressful world. I often do an exercise when I'm talking about Mind in the Making where I ask people, what is life like today? And I tend to get busy, hectic, too much to do, not enough time, always on, confusing, a lot of words about how life is pretty overwhelming these days. And the way we cope with it is coping with stress. But taking on challenges takes us to a whole different level. It's deliberately teaching children to try that next hard thing. So if they don't get an answer right in a math problem and they get a next problem, will they try to go back to the easier problems, or will they go on to try that harder challenge? And again, thriving now and thriving in the future involves very much the ability to take on challenges. And we promote this by what we say to children. We tend to think that praising children all of the time is a way to help them feel secure and self-confident, and it actually does the opposite. The research of Carol Dweck shows that if you say, oh, you're great, you're brilliant, you're smart all the time, the kids won't try hard things because they don't want to lose that label. They don't want to lose being smart. And I'm struck with my little 10-week-old how quickly that culture prevails. I know that when my daughter was breastfeeding, or she was burping her child, the people in the hospital who were showing her how to do that would say to this little baby, good job, good job. You can say you burped. You don't have to start adding extrinsic motivation to everything. The people who use strategy, talk about kids' strategies, or they talk about kids' effort, are much more likely to have kids who will take on challenges. And it's also affected by the way we look at children, just our own eyes, the way we look at children. And we're going to look at that in the visual cliff video.
Yes, we are going to show another video now. So if you had trouble before, you might want to hit refresh on your browser. And if you do have trouble, put something in the Q&A box rather than in the group chat.
Yeah, you have to say watch video, I think, and then make sure that the sound on your computer is on.
So while you're watching this video, and we'll start it in just a moment, put in the chat box, in the group chat box, what challenges does your child or children shy away from? So let's go ahead and watch this video.
Children are constantly watching adults for cues about what to think, how to feel, what to do. You can see this most clearly when a child gets old enough to crawl or toddle around.
When the child is exploring the world, the parent's emotional communication with that child changes drastically. Because the child gets into everything, the parents are going to start trying to regulate the child's behavior, encouraging the child to explore certain things, but also restricting exploration of things that the child might damage. Okay? And then it results in this fascinating phenomenon which all parents observe, which is as the child approaches something that's a potentially prohibitable object, like touching the stereo, the child will lift the hand and then look back as if to say, Mom, is this okay? I think that the communication from the mother or from the father, the vocal communication, encouraging or discouraging activity, sensitizes the child to pay attention to what it is that the parent is communicating about.
Dr. Campos's classic experiment, the visual cliff, shows just how powerful this can be. In the experiment, babies between 9 and 12 months are placed on a large plexiglass-topped table. Half of the table has a checkerboard pattern just underneath the surface, which the baby thinks is plenty safe to crawl on. But halfway across is a visual cliff, which the baby can tell drops off steeply. The plexiglass top continues, so we know it's perfectly fine to proceed. But the baby isn't so sure, and this is a big drop for a baby just starting to crawl. She wants to get across to get the toy. but she's learned to be cautious from dealing with stairs and such. This is where the adult comes in.
In this particular investigation, what we attempted to understand is the extent to which the nonverbal, facial communication coming from the mother to the child powerfully affected that baby's behavior. If the mother is posing a fear face, the baby typically does not cross this stair-step downward, this modified visual cliff or visual step. On the other hand, if the mother poses a smile or somehow poses a nonverbal communication that is not prohibitive but encouraging, the child is much more likely to cross over to her. This particular study demonstrates the role of nonverbal communication in determining the child's behavior in uncertain contexts. The babies use bids for emotion from a significant other person constantly. That's how most of us learn.
Really interesting to watch those babies test it out, and then to see their reaction to the encouragement of their mom.
And if we don't think we do that, just go to a playground and look at the kids climbing on the high slide and how different our faces are. Now, some kids we should make a fear face, but
definitely. All right, let's take a look at the last skill then, and then we'll go into some more examples about how we can promote these skills. So the last skill is self-directed and engaged learning. Tell us about that, Ellen.
There's 6 principles of how we really promote learning, and that's what that chapter does. It summarizes the best research into how we promote that. But one of them is that we help kids set their own goals and be accountable for achieving them. Particularly important is help kids find something that they care about learning, and then they pursue that. And looking at some of the things that the parents have been writing in the chat box, what they're writing about their kids is so moving and wonderful.
Yeah, it is really. So adults can help promote these life skills. Is there how early do you start this, Ellen?
Well, I was trying to see how long it would take me to talk about Isaiah, my grandson. Okay, here we go, second time. You start right away, but in age-appropriate ways. Take the skill of communicating, and right after he was born, and it's a reflex. But if you stick your tongue out at Isaiah, or Zay as we call him, he sticks his tongue back at you. If he makes an O with his mouth and you make an O with your mouth, he's transfixed. Now he's 10 weeks, and we actually have conversations, but conversations without words. So we're teaching the skill of communicating. For example, so if he says "gee," which is his favorite word, "gee," and I say "gee," he loves it, and then he'll say another sound, and I'll say it back, and we're talking. People sometimes don't think that kids really talk till they talk. Well, this is the beginning of talking, or I can clap out the sound. Sometimes he goes "good, good, 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 good," and then I'll go clap, 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 clap with the same rhythm. And you've never seen a kid get so excited. I mean, his little legs kick, and so you're teaching them from the very beginning. But obviously, you're not going to hold up flashcards. Hopefully, you're not going to do that. But
right.
Hold up flashcards for a 10-week-old. But you certainly are promoting the skill of communicating. And basic to all of the skills is our relationship with the child. So obviously, what I'm doing is forming a relationship with this baby, a relationship for life where he feels secure and wonderful. And we're at the center of children learning these skills. A pediatrician said to my daughter, "Your face is your child's best plaything," and I think that's exactly right.
Yeah, that interest in each other is really important. You can start early, but is it ever too late? We had a question from a participant about a child they adopted at 16 months old, and they said he had very little stimulation. Can they help him catch up? Is it ever too late to start?
No, it's never too late. It's absolutely never too late. You just, you start with where your child is, and if you've been a teacher like I am, you'll get a group of kids, let's say, who are chronologically the same age, and you look at their development, and it's all over the place. My next-door neighbor adopted children who also didn't have such a great beginning, and she started with where they were, and those kids are flourishing. So, that's a principle, is you read your child's cues and clues. Again, Jack Niemeyer has a nice way of talking about it. He talks about serve and return. The child does something, throws the ball at you, and you return the ball, if you're going to use the analogy of tennis. So it's serve and return. But Yuri Bronfenbrenner talked about development as a ping-pong game. You pay attention to what's going on with the other person, and you build on that, you extend that. And that's one of the major principles in self-directed engaged learning, is that you're always building on and extending, but a little bit out of reach, but not too far out of reach with what your child is doing. But it should be natural and fun. It's not like, oh my God, I've got something else to do. These are
not another thing on the agenda. But,
oh God, no. No. I mean, those words that we say about life today, we're all too busy. So it's like when we're changing diapers or fixing dinner. One way of promoting focus and self-control, for example, that we're going to talk about in a minute. I'll save the example to when we talk about it.
All right, let's take a look at the next slide, and we'll look at these three skills. So we're going to take a little deeper look into focus and self-control, perspective taking, and taking on challenges. And we're going to talk about things that parents can do that will really make a difference. So, Ellen, in your book, you listed hand clapping as an activity that parents can do to build focus and self-control. How does that work?
Well, that's actually used, believe it or not, as a test of school readiness. Studies, this is Clancy Blair's research at NYU, uses what he calls the peg tapping test, and it's very predictive of whether kids are ready for school. So if the adult taps or claps once, the child, and this you would do with a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, not a baby, but the child would clap twice. So again, you think about it. The child has to pay attention. The child has to remember the rules. The child has to be flexible and not go on automatic. So it's got those 4 components of executive function. And if you do it once, the child does it twice, and if you do it twice, the child does it once. And most kids start out with being able to do the opposite, and pretty soon they follow the leader. And so it takes real skill to do this. It's and you can make it more complicated, and you can make up more rhythms as your child gets older.
That sounds like a great activity for adults too. And sometimes we just are not paying attention. That's
right.
Something where we have to do the opposite.
Right.
We have another question from a parent that I think we should tackle. They said they love to read to our 8-month-old, but she just grabs the book and puts it in her mouth, making it nearly impossible to read to her. Do you have any suggestions to help her focus on what we're reading?
Yeah, I think with 8-month-olds, it's not that they sit down and listen to the whole book. It's that you incorporate that book into your everyday life. For example, a book, a Sesame Street book, Elmo Says, and it's really Simon Says. So you might show the child a page of the book, but then you're saying, Elmo says, touch your head, or I'm going to touch your head. You play the game with I'm going to touch your feet when you're changing your child's diaper. You incorporate that, or 10 Little Fingers, 10 Little Toes. It's a book I really love, and whenever you change a child's diaper, you can say, I see 10 little fingers and 10 little toes, as everybody knows, and it's just a very sweet book. So so many of the young books for infants I wouldn't expect my child to sit down necessarily and listen to it straight through. I would just maybe read a page or two of it and then use it when you're waiting for dinner or you're doing other things.
How about with toddlers? What kinds of things can help toddlers learn focus and self-control?
I would play some of the classic games with toddlers. I'd play I Spy. I spy a bunny, and it's a child stuffed animal. I spy something pink. It's the bunny, but the bunny is pink. So you're helping them pay attention and look where you look, and kids will learn that word and learn to pay attention a lot more if you point to it. Susan Golden Meadows has found that children enter language hands first. The kids where there's gesturing in the family are more likely to learn that. With preschoolers, I would do, this is a test of school readiness too, I would do Simon Says, do the opposite. In fact, Megan McClellan at the University of Oregon uses that and has found that very predictive of kids' vocabulary, kids' literacy, kids' math. And the game is if you touch your head, the kids are to touch their toes. If you touch your toes, the kids are to touch their head. And then when they get to be school age, so they're doing the opposite. When they get to be school age, you can add Simon Says. And I've done it with a room full of adults, and boy, did they get mixed up. It's funny. It's fun. And it's a good stretch break if you're, in a meeting for a long time sitting down.
Great. So one of the things that it seems true for so many kids is that they seem so focused when they're playing computer games or tablet games. And we've had several questions from parents about tablets and other electronic devices. Does using those devices build focus and self-control?
With older children, not with really little children. It's pretty addictive and hypnotic for younger children, but it's really those kinds of personal interactions that build that for younger children. For example, there's a study that was done at Vanderbilt that had children that was looking at whether children could imitate, and it showed it on a screen. The same action then was brought into the room, and adult did it at the same distance away, the same adult, exactly the same thing, and then to see whether the child had learned what she or he had seen. And the kids really didn't learn very much from seeing something on a screen until they were after 2. It's not going to kill them, but they're not going to learn what you think. And they did learn it from the real person. Judy Deloche did an experiment where she wanted to see, one of these vocabulary tablet kind of games that promise your kid's going to know all these words. And they played that with kids, and then they just asked the adult to use the same list of words in everyday conversation. And the kids who had no experience with the words didn't learn any, learned about the same as the kids who had the tablet, but the kids who had parents using the words in everyday, real, meaningful, authentic conversations were the ones who learned them. So with really little kids, not necessarily, but with older kids, 4, 5, 6-year-olds, they can learn from good television. They can learn from computer games, if they're good computer games, as long as they're not blowing up the world all of the time. Values come in here. But Michael Posner has done research on this issue, and he's found he has some very clever games where kids have to anticipate what's going to happen next, and he's found that it improved tests on cognitive kind of activities. Now, we have kind of a debate in the field, which, I really don't like very much, where we sometimes think of only content knowledge as cognitive and these other things as non-cognitive. You've probably heard about that lately, and actually you are using your cognitive ability and using these kinds of promoting these kinds of life skills improves kids and adults socially, emotionally, and intellectually.
Great. The skill of focus and self-control is really about independence, but the next skill we want to talk about, perspective taking, is about getting along with others and understanding someone else's point of view. And when that happens, you said there's naturally less conflict. So a question came in during the registration from a mom with a new baby, and she's concerned about how to resolve jealousy issues with a 3-year-old and a newborn. And she said the baby just takes up so much of the family's time. Is a 3-year-old able to develop this life skill of perspective taking?
That was a question that a researcher named Judy Dunn in England had, and she took a group of children and she followed them from the birth of the baby, the second child, the siblings, all the way till the new baby turned 6. So for 6 years, the older sibling and the new baby, who now became an older kid, were followed. And she found that there was a very simple thing. Remember, I said these are everyday things that we all can do.
Right.
She found that the parents who talked about the new baby as a person, she's fussy. Do you think she wants to eat? Do you think that she needs her diaper changed? Do you think that she's overtired? If we pick her up, do you think she'll stop fussing? Bringing the child into the world of the baby and helping the child understand the baby as a person, it was very predictive of the kid's relationship 6 years later. So, yes, it's good to have time alone with the older child, and the things that we can do that make a difference, but just that simple thing of talking about the baby as a person can affect their relationships.
I think that's absolutely true, and I was glad when that participant asked that question. These are actually my granddaughters, and the one on the right is 3, and the baby is brand new. And there was a terrible jealousy problem when the baby came along for the 3-year-old, and my daughter was really good about explaining about the baby and what she needed, and now. Just a couple months later, the 3-year-old is saying, "Oh, I think she wants me to dance for her," and so she's, she's totally able to see what the baby needs in order to be happy. So it really has worked, that perspective taking. One of the other activities you suggest is to help children learn to understand perspective is to talk about book characters. So you talked a little bit about that before, but tell us what you mean about that. What kinds of questions would we ask about the book characters?
In every story, there's always a character. There are always characters who do things, and not telling, but asking. Why do you think that mouse is doing that? Why do you think that lion, I'm thinking of the mouse and the lion story, why do you think the lion is doing that? And helping children think about what's going on and having them learn to do that. Ross Thompson, he's at the University of California at Davis, looked at the development of perspective taking, and he found that parents who talked about feelings, who talked about what was going on with the characters in a book, in fact, he tested them reading a book without words, and some parents read it straight through, just kind of quick, let's get this, just the facts kind of reading, and some parents really elaborated and talked about and had a discussion with the child about what was going on, and those kids were much better able to learn that.
One of the other questions that came up was there were several people talking about bullying. Would perspective taking help the bully and the bullied?
Yes, I talked earlier about the research of Larry Aber, and he had been studying aggression with teenagers for a long time. What we were worrying about that a lot, and he found that if they used to think that if you teach problem solving to kids, or use words, don't hit, those sorts of things, that was going to work, and it worked, but not to the extent that it should have. And so what they did was brought in a literacy curriculum, but talked a lot about the stories and what was going on with the stories, and talked a lot about feelings. And in the study, they measured the level of aggression in the classrooms. These were grade school kids, but you could do it with preschoolers too, and found that the aggression went way down. The kids most likely to fight had what Larry Aber calls a hostile attribution bias. It's another one of those mouthful. Yeah, it's a mouthful. Don't try to remember it. And what it means is that they misinterpreted other people's cues and clues. They couldn't read behavior very well, and if they read behavior better, they were less likely to sock someone if they bumped them. They might think maybe it was an accident, maybe it really wasn't on purpose.
So perspective taking is a really important skill then. Is there any difference in getting these skills based on gender?
Well, for a long time we've had, all of us who are the parents of girls and boys can absolutely see differences in our children. But if you look at it from a brain level, and now I'm thinking of Sam Wang's Welcome to Your Child's Brain, who he really summarizes the research on gender in that book, and he finds that there are far fewer differences in children. There are more differences among boys than there are between boys and girls, or among girls than there are between girls and boys. So much of the way girls and boys grow up, at least in terms of these life skills, has to do with what we do with them, not something inborn. So you might think that girls are just better at perspective taking than boys. Not so. And Admiral Mike Mullen, who is on the board of the Families and Work Institute, uses the skill of perspective taking, a man. He was the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. You couldn't get more macho than that. Mm-hmm. And when he would go to Afghanistan or Iraq or any of the places that he went during his time as being the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in President Obama's administration, he wouldn't just get briefed on the history or the current events or the things that people get briefed on. He wanted to know how someone growing up in Afghanistan would see the world, would think about a situation, and he was really quite wonderful at diplomacy. So again, this is not like perspective taking is not like a girl skill versus a boy skill. It's a life skill that helps us thrive. Right.
So let's talk. We just have a couple minutes left, Ellen, but let's talk about taking on challenges. It looks like this little guy's ready to take on anything. Was he born that way? Is temperament a part of it?
Temperament. Kids are born with temperament. Temperament predominantly affects how we react to new experiences, and we've seen that in children. Some kids are wary of new experiences. Some kids aren't. Jerry Kagan, Nathan Fox, a lot of researchers have looked at temperament and find that that's one fundamental difference between children. So in terms of kids taking on challenges, for some kids it's going to be a little bit harder than other kids, but by the time they're 6, Jerry Kagan says this, if the parents help them step by step learn to take on a challenge in the ways that we talked about before, you might not even know that they were born with a temperamental difference.
So what do you do if a child is resistant to taking on the challenge then?
Break it down in little steps.
Okay.
And you also ask the kids how they can manage. One of the more successful, here's a good example. Heidelise Alls worked with kids after 9/11. She's at Harvard. And, that really was a challenge, coping with the world in a 9/11 world. And rather than tell the kids it's going to be okay or nothing happened in Boston, what she did was ask kids to figure out how they were going to manage and help them come up with their own coping skills. And you can do that fairly early in a child's life. You don't have to wait until your child is so much older.
And can you do it if you're not sure about it? A question came in that Mom says she's comfortable meeting people in business but not necessarily good at meeting new people in social situations. Is she going to be able to help her daughter be able to do that?
Well, I'm going to actually, when you say that, it reminds me of my own mother. She was a widow, and she ran a business in a men's world at that time. And she would have to go on buying trips because she was running my father's business. She would have to go by herself to New York on buying trips. And we knew that she was scared to go. She really didn't like going off by herself on these trips. But she always got on that train. So I learned that you can be scared, or you can make a mistake, or something can be hard, and yet you can do it. And so, my mother's example is very powerful to me.
That's great. So how do you know when you've been successful? How do you know when your kids have these skills?
It's a process. We're always learning them. I know when I was writing this book, and I'd be preoccupied with the book, and then one of my kids, as soon as I sat down, I finally had a minute to sit down to work, and I was like, now it's my time. And then I know we feel that with little kids, but we can feel that with grown kids too. And the phone would ring, and it would be one of my kids, and I'd have to remember what was most important in life, which are my kids, and I would literally have to walk away from the computer, call me back on my cell phone, and I'd go take a walk and talk to my kids, because I knew if they called me, they needed me. And so I was learning focus. I had learned it so well I could be distracted, and they could tell if I was tapping on the computer. So I had to learn it myself. We're always learning them. We're always getting better at them. And in fact, we've developed a program to teach these skills to adults, and we always start or to teach them to children, and we always start with the adult learning them himself or herself before we ever think of how to promote them in kids. It's and the book is written that way too.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Ellen. It's been really, really interesting, and thank you also for donating 5 of your books. 5 participants that are with us now are going to be getting a copy of your book. So we're really thrilled about that. And after the webinar, we're going to continue to discuss this project on the Bright Horizons online community. And also both on the brighthorizons.com website and the mindinthemaking.org website, there are lots and lots of good resources for families. So you can look on those sites, and on the brighthorizons.com site there is a link to the Bright Horizons online community where you'll see more discussion about this, and also a link to our other webinars that have been archived. So thanks again so much for your time and your energy today, and your focus and self-control, Ellen. It was wonderful. I'd like to invite everyone who's on the webinar to look at the widgets on the screen and look for one that looks like the picture on your slide here. Please click on that. It will open a new window to a survey link, and we'd really appreciate your feedback and your suggestions. And we will be leaving the chat box open for just a couple of more minutes but closing it at the top of the hour. But we totally look forward to seeing you on our next parent webinar, those of you that joined, and thank you so much for being with us today. Bye for now.